to the degree that you want something is the degree you're afraid of not having.
Yeah. God, I wish I started when I was younger. I go, well, yeah, but you didn't. So shut the fuck up and let's keep going.
Right.
Like, you can't.
Nobody changes until they change their energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. Because it's not till then that it's really real.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is way worse than I thought. It's like, oh yeah, it's way, way worse than you thought.
Yeah.
But luckily, there's more to you than you think.
Paul, it's good to see you, my friend.
It's good to see you, Aubrey. Thanks.
Yeah. So you're in Hawaii now, and this is your new temporary home as in the midst of all of this mayhem.
It's where I ended up. It wasn't expected. I was in Costa Rica, New York shut down, and I ended up here, and I've been here since. So I'm grateful to be here.
There certainly could be worse places on this fine planet to be isolating. Well, there's so much going on, and I'm really eager to talk to you about it. And I know that you have a new book called Alchemy that's releasing, and I've gotten to dive in a little bit to that. But there's just so much going on. I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of the themes that have been coming through you for that. So, ultimately, and I've heard some of your transmissions as this has gone on, we're in the midst of what the guides call a reckoning of sorts. Really, what are they really talking about during this time, and what does a reckoning really mean for us to understand?
I mean, in the first book that they dictated through me, which was called I Am the Word, which was in 2000, they dictated in 2009. They said, humanity is at a time of reckoning. And a reckoning, they said, is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations, and that everything that's been created in fear needs to be re-seen or re-known in a new way. So, they say things like, individuals have karma, countries have karma, communities have karma, and essentially, I'm not saying that this is a great karmic moment, but they are saying that we're now perceiving or being asked to perceive what we've been in accord with, what we've supported consciously or unconsciously, because things need to be changing. They've been talking about this consistently for years. And it's funny because, when stuff really started to hit the fan, people started writing me and sending me quotes from, things the guides had said in the past that were really somewhat prescient, and I was surprised. But they said in a book called The Book of Truth, which they dictated just before the last presidential election, that, everything that's been hidden was about to be seen, and that none of that was necessarily going to be a comfortable process, but it was an essential process. They said, it's like your life becomes an excavation site. What was buried 5 weeks ago and 5,000 weeks ago is going to be exhumed. And the purpose of this, I understand, is so that things can be brought to the light and transformed, re-seen. They say nothing is healed when it is hidden. So the process that we're in, I suspect, in some ways, is a process of getting to see what's always been there that we've chosen not to look at. And I think that we're in this collective situation, and they've talked about this. We haven't had a sort of collective experience like the ones that we're having on a planetary level in a long, long time, and that this is great opportunity. They continue to frame things as great opportunity, and also how we make it through things is very much our choice. How we opt to sort of attend to what's before us and who's beside us. They say again and again and again, the action of fear is to claim more fear. And, if we're making choices in fear, or we're making choices in violence, or we're making choices to blame, we're not going to have a very easy time of what's before us.
I was just reading in Alchemy that they actually describe karma as opportunity. And so where some people might think, oh, well, this is our karma. We've been punished by quotations God because we were bad, and then God gave us COVID and now we're being punished. You hear this kind of thing from, different ministers throughout the time, like, blaming these natural events on our own sins. I think probably goes all the way back to Sodom and Gomorrah, this story of being punished as a whole civilization for our sexual misconducts and this idea. But that's not what the guides are talking. They're just talking about these universal events as karmic opportunities so that we can learn as individuals in the classroom of evolution.
They say that everything's an opportunity to learn. I don't know that they've called COVID a karmic event. I think that we tend to think selfishly, I think, as a country, as individuals. It's about me and I created this, what we tend to forget is that the collective is also making choices and that we're in agreement with the collective. And a lot of, I think, what we're having to see now is the ramifications of collective choice. And how do we attend to these things that we've perhaps been participatory to, but in denial of, because it's much more convenient to pretend that as long as we're getting our individual needs met, everything must be okay. And I think things probably have not been okay for quite some time.
Right.
And getting to see that, and again, that becomes opportunity. It's the opportunity to re-perceive, to re-see, and I suspect perhaps see, as the guides would say, with new eyes. Alchemy was dictated before all this stuff was going on. And now it's going on. And you go, okay, well, here we go. They've been talking about. And it's hopeful, I suspect, as well, just not comfortable. None of this, I think, is comfortable, or is it necessarily intended to be?
Yeah. One of the teachings that the guides have also talked about consistently is the way that we see something is important. If we see war as the horror of war, that's our own kind of agreement to that construct. And in that way, it got me thinking, and whether you want to answer this or if the guides feel compelled to answer it, either way, but how do you see something, or not something like, but how do you see COVID-19 in the higher way? How do you see it not as what the societal story is, but how do you see that in a higher way?
Well, I'm challenged by this stuff. I have to say that right off the bat. I have a hard time with it, but the guides have said again and again and again and again that there's one note playing in the entire universe, and that one note, that one sound or tone, is articulated as everything we see. So if you want to call it God or source or whatever, is the foundational note being played. And they say that the greatest problem, the only problem we really face, is what they call the denial of the divine, the denial of God, to say that God can't be where that thing is that we think is so terrible. Because they say what you put in darkness calls you to that darkness. What you damn damns you back. It's really simple stuff. What you blesses you in return. So what they're talking about now in their books, and I'm trying to keep up with the teachings because they come fast, and I'm sitting there taking the dictation, and the dictation's transcribed, and that becomes the book, and there's no editing. What they're talking about is this thing called the upper room, which they say is a higher mind, a higher level of consciousness that is available to us. We've been operating as if there's this false ceiling, which is this idea of separation, and very much have created a world that operates in accord with that. They say when you lift to what they call the upper room, which is what they're teaching, everything can be lifted to that, which is again to the mind of God or the divine that is already present. So what I understand about this is that they're talking about something called rearticulation or transposing. They say any song can be sung in a higher octave. You can sing any song here, up there, and beyond what we can even perceive of or conceive of as sound. It still exists, even if it's not available to the ears. And they seem to be talking about all of these things being lifted through consciousness. So they begin to say that you align to a level of vibration, you, Aubrey, me, Paul, anybody who chooses this, aligning in what they call the upper room at this level of tone or vibration. And that the tone of your expression or your resonant field then becomes what lifts what you encounter. And basically, it's the idea that God sees God in everything, and what you put outside of God you're denying the action of the divine in. So the idea is always about reclamation, reclaiming things as of the divine so that they can be re-seen or transformed. It's not about saying, oh, this is a good thing, or, oh, I support this act that I could never agree to. It's not about that. It's in some ways almost a deconstruction of meaning, the meaning that we've endowed everything is. The guides have said things like, you can't lift the evil man to the upper room because you've made him evil and you've aligned to him at that level of vibration, which is, again, who you put in darkness, what you put in darkness calls you to that level of tone or vibration. So when you go up there, you actually have to re-perceive the man, perhaps beyond his acts, beyond what's been, prescribed or what we've been taught to believe. So this whole idea of sort of meaning and what things are supposed to mean that we endow great power to tends to support what we've had. So I'm going to ask them, since we're going here, and I don't know what they're going to say, and I hope I don't interrupt this, but I'll see if I can channel. It's morning here. Now it's an odd morning for me. So let me just see if I get anything on things like COVID or what we're experiencing. The idea of what you see is must be understood. They're saying the idea of what you see must be understood. Everything is idea. Everything is idea. And the idea is encoded with meaning. And the idea is encoded with meaning, endowed with properties and power, endowed with properties and power. We don't deny the disease. We don't deny the disease that you encounter, but we do reperceive it. But we do reperceive it in a higher vibrational field, when something is lifted to the higher. When something is lifted to the higher, beyond the idea of fear, indeed, it can be reknown. Indeed, it can be reknown, rearticulated if you wish, as of its source, What you deny the divine in, what you deny the divine in becomes your challenge, period. And they're saying period.
Yeah. I think that's really well said, of course, as it always is from the guide. One of the challenges, I think, is instead of re-articulating what this is and claiming it in a new way, we try to rationalize it. We say, oh, well, this is coming to us because, and we always say because this is an opportunity for us to have a reckoning with our own adoption of fear. And it's because of that, then it makes sense. But I think there's some things that our mind, our purview, is just too small to actually understand the universal because of something as big as COVID. We're just trying to make a story that makes sense to us, but it's really bigger than that.
I agree with you. And I was thinking about this the other day. The guides talk about frames sometimes in their books, like we're operating with these frames, like, I'm not good enough as a frame. And the purpose of the frame is to continue to accrue the evidence of the idea or the frame. And I think what everybody's doing right now, out of sheer fear or need or some desire to exert some control, is to put a frame on all this stuff so that it becomes manageable. You understand? Right. And I don't know that it's manageable at that level. I think we're being invited to have an experience of the unknown. And the unknown is, I don't know what's going to happen with this stuff. I don't really have an idea. And every idea that I have is going to be based on some presumption of evidence of what has been prior. Do you understand this? So the guides say every time you're saying it should be this way, you're calling an idea of the past to create from, should doesn't exist without a precedent.
Right.
So this idea of entering into the unknown without the toolkit that the small self or the egoic structure has maintained to sort of exert control, that's a very new place for everybody to be at the same time. We all have these moments in our lives, I think, when we don't know what's going to happen. You get a diagnosis, you lose a relationship, everything that you thought you trusted in changes. But suddenly we're having a collective experience of this, which I think is pretty extraordinary. The guides I work with used to say sometimes when they do workshops, they say to people, you don't have to go home again after this. Go home. And people go, what? And they said, you're choosing to go home. You're leaving this room. You're choosing to go back to what you knew, but you just know that you're in choice. And it happened to me, which is the craziest thing. I was in Costa Rica. I packed for a week. My dog was with the sitter. I was in Costa Rica. Suddenly, New York is shutting down. And the next thing I know, I'm getting on a plane to a place I've never been to stay in a tiny house. It was crazy, but it was extraordinary because all of my mechanisms to sort of maintain my idea of who I was, who I should be, how things should work, were completely lost to me. And I've learned an enormous amount through this, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm fortunate, that I can work from wherever I am, and other people don't have that, that ability. But I think that the collective is now experiencing, how can I say, I'm going to go to the guys that experiencing the collective is experiencing what it means not to be in control. That's the drop jaw. Whenever they go like, that's like the aha moment,
Yeah.
And what I think that results in is polarization and everybody trying to find a stake in something that can make some sense and to rationalize it, whether it's somebody saying this is sin. The guides have said for a long time, they said it right before the last presidential election. There's a lecture, it's actually up online, called Great Change. It was like 3 days when everybody thought the outcome was assured. And the guide said, you all think of choice as, I'm going to have the milk or the cream in my coffee. And they said, what's about to happen is what happened when the table that was holding the milk and the cream turns over. And then what are you dealing with? Something very, very, very different. And they've talked about this as a time of great change. They've been saying it, relentlessly. And, the guides don't teach, Armageddon. They don't teach that. I mean, it's a loving, hopeful teaching. It is not a fear-based teaching, but it's really a teaching of accountability and personal accountability and collective accountability. And people sort of want, I suspect, a spirituality that's sort of sufficient, which is I can have God when I feel like it, or I can have a spiritual life as it suits me. And that's all very true. You can have those things. But I suspect that we're at a time now where we're being invited to reassess what we thought was so, who we thought we were, because suddenly when you don't have the job you had, or the marriage falls apart, or everything that you thought sort of claimed you with a sense of identity is suddenly challenged. We have great opportunity to see perhaps who we might be beyond those things, beyond the mask that we self-identified through. So,
yeah, I mean, a couple of things come up. One, I think as we step into this unknown, beyond the known, where we don't have as much control, you'll see people scramble for control. Fear makes you want to control more. So whether it's the precautions that we're taking individually or nationalistically, which may be advised or may not be, whatever your opinion is, that's fine. You're entitled to that. But it's all an attempt to maintain control and try and control whether we get this or whether we don't. And in so many ways, even control and understanding, even our own understanding is a mechanism of control. Like so many people have said, well, you should see all the planets in retrograde. Of course, this is going on right now. But in that way, that frame is a way that they can understand, anticipate, control their understanding of the unknown and what's going to happen by some astrological timetable that they're like, aha, I figured it out. I cracked the code. When really, maybe you didn't. Maybe this is just, we're in the fucking unknown and here we are. And it's just our choice how we respond to it.
Very much so, and I suspect when we can begin to see it as opportunity, we're going to make higher choices or better choices. This is an opportunity to know who we are, how things have been operating, and really what we've been in collective agreement to. What we sort of said was okay, perhaps even if it wasn't so okay. So I stay hopeful, but I really understand, because I have it too, this need to sort of, it was a relief for me. Mercury's in retrograde. That's my wife. This sucks. It's like, okay, that's fine. Well, perhaps, but it gives me some comfort, to be able to exert just that level of control. In spite of all the information I get, this is still an enormous challenge.
Yeah, for sure. So here's a question that I have. One of the consistent teachings is that, it's incredibly important to identify as the true self, the monad, the part of us that's actually the same amongst every individual. Now, with the social justice movement that's been going on, there are legitimate claims for communities, whether it's a sex, a sexual oriented gender, a sexual orientation, a race. The communities have been marginalized. So in that aspect, it is important to identify identities based on our own prejudices and constructs we have marginalized so that we can help make the corrections and reparations necessary. But at the same time, I think we're running the risk of being, overdoing it to a certain extent and denying the fact that ultimately at the truest level, we are all the same. So there's this tension between how much we identify the construct, these identity constructs, and how much we actually say, well, actually, in truth, we're all the same force of the same source.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. The guys that talked about this, they started talking about these things about 3 books ago, which surprised me. They started talking about, the prison systems and how we basically, they say, you are your brother's keeper. You always have been. It's not convenient, but it's true. Now, I suspect that we can move to a place of realization where we know this to be true. I'm not my age. The guides say this: I'm not my age, I'm not my gender, I'm not my religion, my ethnicity, but these are ways of being known, and they have value and importance. They're ways of being known. And in some ways, it's how we're choosing to engage in this collective landscape. So I think the great opportunity now, it's not to sort of increase the idea of separation. Frankly, you've got to bring everybody to the table so that you can share the meal. And if somebody is excluded from the table for any reason, the meal is not shared, which is the collective experience. So we have to have everybody there first. And I think some of that is happening now in ways that are long overdue. I am an old teacher. I taught college for 25 years, and I learned an enormous amount just about being, from that. My first teaching gig when I was, out of the blue was in a high school in the Bronx, where I was one of the only white faces. And boy, was that illuminating for me. Boy, did I get to see how far off I was. I was a 29-year-old, 28, 29-year-old guy who was just out of Yale grad school, I was really clueless. And it's not that I'm so aware now, I'm more aware now. But I don't think that these ideas are exclusive. The idea of claiming and celebrating your ethnicity, the idea of, enjoying the great heritage that can come from a religious background. But that's not all we are, it just isn't. Right. It's a way of being known. It's a valuable part of our experience, but it's not at a level, finally, of essence. It's not only who we are, nor could it ever be. Where I think we get stuck is when we become rigid about these things. When I was 22, I had platinum blonde hair and I was skinny, and I don't have any hair and I'm not so skinny. That's who I was. It was a valid experience that I had of being, and this is a valid experience too. It's just a different way of being known, and known in exchange with a landscape that is, frankly, a shared opportunity to learn. That's what this really is.
Yeah. What is have the guides, I don't know if the guides have talked about it, but what is the best way when we see some of these things that we want to resist? Racism, bigotry, some aspects of the patriarchy. Like, what is the best way to show up in resistance to these things? Because again, that which you damn damns you back, there's these kind of claims of it. So how do we show up in resistance to these things that we don't like?
Resistance may be the wrong word, because I suspect that, I'm going to ask them in a minute, but I suspect that the guides would say, what you resist, you're actually endowing with power. You're actually in still at loggerheads with, and that's not the way they say change happens. They talk about change happening through re-knowing. You have to lift above it and then lift what you see to it. And they talk about this in metaphysical terms, which is the realization of the presence of the divine. That's what changes things, not through condemnation, but through realization. Now, I may have said that wrong, because maybe there's a place for condemnation. Well, they're saying indeed there is, but you're using the wrong word to describe what we mean. But you're using the wrong word to describe what we mean. Each of you says yes. Each of you says yes to what you see, to what you see. Everything you see, you are in vibrational accord to, which means you're aligned with it, which means you are in alignment with it, which means the consciousness that you hold is actually confirming what you see, is actually confirming what you see and embedding it with meaning, and embedding it with meaning, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be in idolatry, all of these ideas, ways of being seen and seeing, ways of being seen and seeing inform matter. When you lift to a higher level of emotion, when you lift to a higher level of vibration, or fear, when you are no longer operating in fear, seeking to announce yourself as the correct one, which is self-righteousness, which is indeed the small self, which is indeed the small self seeking to be seen as powerful, seeking to be seen as powerful. You can re-know what something truly is. You can re-know what something truly is. The act of re-knowing, reperceiving, seeing the inherent divine, where it appears to be in lack, will actually transform what you see, will actually transform what you see and give you great opportunity to be catalytic to great change, but to confirm what you don't like, but to confirm what you don't like, to confirm it and continue to confirm it, actually confirms the expression of it, actually confirms the expression of it. In other words, that terrible thing does not disappear by being called terrible. It transforms when it can be seen as holding a new opportunity, Nothing will change. What's first in potential until it is first seen as potential. Underline the word potential. It means a possibility. It means a possibility of what may be renowned, of what may be renowned or reborn. Period. In the same period.
It makes total sense, because instead of being anti something, what they're saying is to be pro the opposite. So in certain ways, right? And that's the way to condemn it. The way to resist it, condemn it, fight it, is not to resist or condemn. It's actually to support and raise your level of vibration to the thing that's not that, which is inclusion, radical love, acceptance of everybody for who they truly are. Instead of being anti-sexist, anti-racist, patriarchy, be pro radical equality, universal. And that seems to make a lot of sense to me.
Well, they're saying that's where the opportunity lies.
Right.
That's the opportunity. The opportunity is not to go back in to the bloody battlefield. That's really what we've done. The guides have said, war, we've lived with war for so long, we think we're always going to have it, and consequently we perpetuate it. We expect to see what we get. And until we can lift to a level of consciousness where war isn't an option, when we wouldn't even consider that, we're probably going to have it. And that's a possibility, that's a possibility, but we don't attend to it as such. So we end up perpetuating what we've had, even when we know it doesn't work. It really doesn't.
Yeah. So again, it's even the same model. Instead of focusing so much on anti-war, warring against war, why don't you go pro-peace, peacefully in favor of peace? That seems to be the thing that's going to be the most effective, just from a purely pragmatic, not even metaphysical standpoint, but from a pragmatic standpoint.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's change gears a little bit, because I've had some pretty radical shifts in my own life. I recently got married. I don't know if thank you. Yeah. Got married a couple weeks ago to Vailana, and it was a really paradigm altering experience. And it kind of opens up my mind to some different possibilities, which I wanted to talk to you and the guides about. But the first experience was one in which we were both in meditation, and we had no agenda for this meditation. It was just, we were both dropping into a meditation assisted by some ketamine. And we're in this meditation as just a general spiritual practice. And all of a sudden, both of us experience what feels like our souls, which to me are always kind of visioned like these spherical orbs when I see them in my vision. But these things, it just kind of overlaid over each other. And we had this shared vision of our souls overlaying over each other, two whole, complete souls. It wasn't like Jerry Maguire, you complete me, like there were two puzzle pieces that snapped in or something. It was like two complete souls that overlaid. And in the overlay, there was this kind of reinvigoration of energy. And it felt like in that moment, even though we weren't together at all, our souls formed a union. And that was like this just kind of like mind-blowing moment where our souls kind of formed this union. And then that's been kind of the guide star, and so many other things have come that way. So much healing, so much growth, a lot of beautiful things have come and kind of accelerated us on this path to actually, make concrete this union through the, through marriage and through that kind of practice, which we've re-articulated in our own mind. But nonetheless, it brings me to this kind of question about this idea of sacred union, or this idea of twin flames, this idea of, on a soul level, what is happening, and why are these ideas in the zeitgeist, and not necessarily for me personally, but just in generality. Like, is there such a thing as souls that in some way perhaps share an oversoul? That's a theory that's out there, this twin flames theory, like souls can share an oversoul and be different articulations of the same soul? Or is it this long-standing agreement that souls have had to continue to teach each other and learn through the union there? Or is this just the small self finding some way to say, this must be the soul?
Yeah. They don't talk much about this. They haven't. Although once they corrected me because I was doing a reading for somebody and they said, I want to know who my twin flame is, or something like that. And I said, well, I don't think there is such a thing. And the guy said, oh, indeed there is, because it wasn't, I thought it was one of those sort of titles that gets bandied about.
Sure.
I'm
me too.
To find my soulmate, So let me see if I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this for you, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, please.
It's about for you, and maybe I can then go to the universal. You actually come through like you were really ready for this. Like you were really ready to dig your heels in. And you're actually saying it was too fast. It was all too fast. It was all too fast. Mm-hmm. I needed to re-see who I was. And that was about stopping long enough to see who you were with somebody else in a real way. And when I go to you with this relationship, you're like, huh? You're almost saying, like, did this happen? So I'm going to go to the higher, if I can, and see if there's anything about this. It's all opportunity. It's all opportunity. Union is opportunity to know self and union. Union is opportunity to know the self and union, to know the self and union. It's not a prerequisite for being. It is not a prerequisite for being. It's the way many of you choose to learn. It's the way many of you choose to learn. The obligation to another. The obligation to another through a contract. Through a contract must be understood. Must be understood as long as you are maintaining choice. As long as you are maintaining choice, you are sovereign. You are sovereign when you're debasing the self. When you are debasing the self, relying on another for fortitude, relying on another for fortitude in ways not supportive of you, in ways that are not supportive of you, you will be challenged. You will be challenged. The contract itself is only as useful as what is behind it, as what is behind it, when love is behind it. When love is behind it, you have opportunity. You have opportunity when the contract is negotiating funds. When the contract is about negotiating funds or deciding who can be with whom, and no one else, it is operating in fear. It is operating in fear to choose marriage. To choose marriage as a way to learn, can be beneficial, but it is not a requirement for a relationship to support itself, but it is not a requirement for a relationship to support itself. So that's them on marriage. But I'm going to see if there's anything about sort of soul unions or things like that. When a human being incarnates, when a human being incarnates, there are individuals, he, she, it, must understand, have come to teach through experience with them, These are the relationships we're discussing. These are the relationships you are discussing. Some are known in love, some less in love, some less in love, an opportunity to face fear, than opportunity to face fear, learn through challenge or learn through challenge. It's always for the soul's benefit. It's always for the soul's benefit. To romanticize this To romanticize that I have met my soulmate, I have met my soulmate gives you an opportunity to satisfy the need, again, to call something by a name, that gives you a sense of authority, that gives you a sense of authority and control. My soulmate, not his or theirs, not his or theirs. Useful in some ways. This is useful in some ways, a stage of development, again, until you can find, but again, until you can find that the entire world is your lover, you'll be disappointed. You will be disappointed in one human being cannot maintain all your needs, all your needs, period, in the same period.
That's very much in accord with what I've kind of always believed. And then you have the personal experience, which is like, I wonder if there is something else. But it seems like what the guides are saying is, that's really not important what you call it or what you think the origin of this thing is. What's important is it loving? And is it facilitating growth for both of you? Like, is it a catapult and a lever that you can use to learn and actually recognize the truth of who you are? And if it is, great. That's what the soul's here to do anyways. So you are soul mates, but not to the exclusion of being mates to the whole world, which is all ways that your soul can learn.
You're saying how you operate in union is up to both of you, and that's the choice. And that's the choice, to move into plurality and shared experience, while maintaining sovereignty, which is the individual's ability to claim identity, and authority in every exchange, period, in the same period.
Mm. When you look at the great spiritual masters that we have record of, at least for the most part, all the way from Buddha to a more contemporary spiritual teacher like Ram Dass, it's very rare that you see them in union, where they're with a partner that it's kind of on the same platform as them, like holding hands and sharing this wisdom. Why is that? What is the reason why these, spiritual teachers have really been, in large part, on their own?
It's an interesting question. I'm here on Maui, and I've been very lovingly taken in by the community that was surrounding Ram Dass here. They've been inviting me over, and it's been really a delightful experience for me to be a part of it, because I find them all so pure in their intent, and it's a devotional community around a brilliant human being. Let me ask this. I complain. I'm not saying I'm a great spiritual teacher at all. I'm actually just a channel. I'm not the teacher. Other people can get to be teachers. But, I complain about this all the time. So, maybe there's a context for this. I actually hear there is a context, and in some ways a prerequisite, and in some ways a prerequisite for this level of alignment, when you devote yourself to the teaching. When you devote yourself to the teaching, or to be the ambassador of teaching, or to be the ambassador of a teaching, as Paul is choosing to do, you limit the self. You limit the self in certain ways. Your priority is set for you. Your priority is set for you at a level of soul. If there comes a time when the prerequisite for the life you live, is no longer to be the teacher, or the wise one, or the wise woman, or the sage, perhaps you will change your mind. Perhaps you will change your mind and encourage an experience of marriage or union. In fact, not precluded this. You are in fact not precluded from this by the choice to be at this level, but it becomes challenging. But it becomes challenging because you must withstand the changes, that being the author of a teaching, claims you in, which is in discomfort, and challenging to most things that you would assume for the self, without it. In other words, if you wish to go on this ride, you must expect your baggage to be seen. Released, released, discarded as you elevate in vibration, as you elevate in vibration. Many relationships are maintained. Many relationships are maintained through obstacles or through challenges, but it's hard to hold somebody's hands. But it's hard to hold somebody's hand when you're in an elevator, going upward, and they're choosing not to, and they are choosing not to, period.
That's something that I get a lot when I'm in, coaching for the Fit for Service Fellowship, or, a lot of people will talk about how they're on this path of growth, and their partner is, stubbornly kind of resisting the path of growth, and and it's not even so much growth, it's more of a process of excavation, which the guides have done a great job reframing, right? We're always the true self. We're always the enlightened one. We're always who we always are, but we just block that. We put on masks and layers that prevent us. So this process of excavating all of these other constructs of the mind and ego and small self so that we get to the true self of who we are. And they have a partner who's in resistance in some ways to that thing. And that's obviously, if we are truly dedicated to actually recognizing the truth of who we are, which from the guide's perspective is probably the most important thing that any human being can do, right? Is like recognize the truth of who we are. Then that creates a pretty obvious tension. And so I could suppose that in cases of spiritual masters, whoever they are, male or female, they would have to find someone who was not hindering their ability to recognize the truth of who they are, but was actually accelerating it, mutually so.
Well, I actually hear that's accurate and different than you think, and different than you think every relationship you have is an opportunity for growth, and finally no one can stop your growth. And finally, no one can stop your growth but you. It is always choice. It is always choice. The small self would like to say, I am becoming a master. I am becoming a master. I cannot be bound. I cannot be bound, where the true self may say, when the true self may say, the one before me is of God, the one before me is of God. I will learn love through this relationship. I will learn love through this relationship, and I will unmask myself, and I will unmask myself beyond what I thought I was, beyond what I thought I was, to maintain it. You may learn through your choices. You may learn through your choices. They may not be what you would choose. They may not be what you would choose at a level of persona where they will lift you, but they will lift you. This does not mean you have to be alone. This does not mean you have to be alone. You take a great lover. You take a great lover when you go on this path. When you go on this path, which is the divine, as all things, period, in the same period.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's also some discussion that, Jesus as a man may have been the actually exception to this, in that a lot of people think that the true history of Mary Magdalene was redacted from, the Bible and biblical literature, and that she was actually a really strong force in recognizing the Christ consciousness within Jesus, and also recognizing Christ conscious in general. That's why it bears the name Christ consciousness, because he was able to access that. Have the guides ever talked about, Mary's role, that kind of feminine, polarity?
I don't think so. I mean, but I am in agreement with you that she was, a hugely important part of that ministry. But no, they haven't talked about it. They don't. Very, very rarely do they talk about, when they talk about masculine and feminine, they talk about it as principles, as vibrational principles. People tend to want to relegate it to gender. And I don't know that that's
right.
necessarily what this is really about. So I haven't heard a lot about it. But this is just not a subject. They speak to, in the very first book that they dictated, I think the masculine pronoun was used extensively. And there was a woman who was present for the dictations, Victoria Nelson, who complained about it. And the guide said, when we use the word man, we're speaking to humanity. But in the next book, they got so inclusive with the pronouns that they would actually switch them in the middle of a sentence. The copy editor went crazy, It realizes that she must know herself. It was like, whoa. But basically, that was, I think, the principle, that it's malleable. These are ways of knowing the self. They are not who you are. I remember once they, said something to the effect of, this isn't about genitals. It really isn't at all. That's not what they're talking about. When they're speaking to the truth of who and what we are. Again, it doesn't exclude. I'm going to see if they want to say anything about this, only because nobody's asked. And this has been a week of people asking questions that nobody. Man. The idea of masculine and feminine is actually pronounced. The idea of masculine and feminine is actually pronounced in form, is actually pronounced in form more than in spirit, more than in spirit. A spirit actually has no gender. A spirit actually has no gender. It is not that it is neutral. It is not that it is neutral. It is actually inclusive. It is actually inclusive of all things, when you lower in vibration and strata. When you lower in vibration and strata, indeed, when you take form, you are choosing to learn. You are choosing to learn in the vehicle that you have claimed, What it means, but what it means to be a man or a woman has actually changed throughout the millennium, and as you continue, it will continue to unmask. It will continue to unmask beyond the deliberate ways that you have codified form, In fact, once you understand that form truly is malleable to thought, that form truly is malleable to thought, many things that you once thought were firm, or intractable will be changed, period. And they're saying period.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm understanding really, then in spirit, we represent all the polarities. The monad has no polarity itself. So it has no masculine, it has no feminine. So the truth of who we are is actually inclusive of both the masculine and feminine construct. Now, as we articulate into form, regardless of genitals, I mean, a man can be representing the divine feminine and a woman can be representing the divine masculine. But is there kind of a bias, I guess you could say, towards a proclivity towards one of these types of constructs that people have?
I hear it's historical bias more than anything else, involved in everything, but you've all been everything in that. And that's what you dismantle when you articulate in a higher way, to become the realization, to become the realized self, the monad or the Christ itself, the monad or the Christ itself, an expression while maintaining body. While maintaining body does not exclude the other sex, make you a mystical man, it makes you a being, You're moving towards being. You are moving towards being beyond the emblematizations, codification of what these things have meant, historical precedent. So in answer to your question, they're talking about historical precedent, more than anything else, more than that there was a reason for that was accurate or true. Okay.
So as souls, choose an incarnated form, for example, like I'm in the belief and understanding that Aubrey as a soul has incarnated many times before. As the guides have said, they've often incarnated and taken bodies. Would I have a bias and a proclivity towards incarnating as masculine because of my inherent nature? Or is it just kind of like, what is the next lesson to learn?
That's what I get. It depends on what you wish to learn, what the benefit will be of the embodiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a beautiful way to look at it, which kind of circles back to what we were talking about before, which is we get so entrenched in this idea of identity and how important that is. Oh, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm this race, I'm that sex, I'm that, this sexual orientation, when really we're just choosing different paths that are going to allow us the greatest opportunity to learn the lessons that our soul really wants to learn.
Yeah, I think so. And I think probably, I can imagine sort of screaming, why do I want to do this? But it's the best thing. I have a friend, Natalie Sudman, who wrote a wonderful book called The Application of Impossible Things. She was an archaeologist that was on government assignment in Iraq, and she was blown up by a roadside bomb and had one of those big experiences, And she talks about standing over her body with her guides, deciding how much she should get herself fixed and how much she should leave it in. She'll learn through all these really interesting things. And, from my perspective, I'm going, oh, boy, I didn't want to come and learn these lessons. It's a lot easier for me to incarnate in, I don't know, maybe a healthy family, with lots of things I can think that I didn't choose. But, this is who's here now and who's learning through these experiences. And I don't know that you would be who you are without what you came through, nor would I or anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, when I look back at my life, I know that wisdom enough to have no regrets for anything that's happened. And granted, I've been incredibly blessed overall, but even the things from car accidents to different traumas that I've experienced, you see the blessing in it. And so really the lesson is to have that greater acceptance. And then my only thing that I would change would just be my enjoyment of whatever my lot was, my choice to actually be present, accept, enjoy, and appreciate whatever the classroom curriculum that I'm currently going through.
You're really good with that, but you've always been, I think, an advocate for pleasure,
Yeah.
It's true. And I was really new into this stuff, and I was in my 26 or something. I went to somebody's meditation group, and they did this guided meditation where you had to see your path unfold before you. And everybody went around and said what they saw. And people were saying, the rainbows are out and the birds are singing, I'm going up this hill. And it came to me, and I was like scaling the witch's mountain from the Wizard of Oz, like hands and feet and a pickaxe. And also very proud of the fact that it was hard, because that meant it meant something. And as I get older, I'm increasing my capacity for joy. I mean, it's the gift of being informed, it doesn't have to be. I think, this old paradigm of sort of going to the altar on broken glass is done. I don't think we need it. But I do think, and I actually always do say this, that none of this is necessarily comfortable. The process of growth and outgrowing who you think you are, who you should have been, or what it means to be. All of that stuff is challenging, at a personal level. And now that the collective is going through this stuff, certainly at a collective level as well.
Yeah. What is it makes me kind of, and I've often pondered this as well, when you start to understand that the soul is constantly conspiring with your small self, with other people's selves, with the world at large, is conspiring to bring you the opportunity to learn. So what is the elbow room? What is the actual scope of the choice as we think it is? Because we think that we're deciding all of these things, but really perhaps our soul is putting us in positions where we learn. So what is the actual scope and frame in which we are as an identity construct choosing? Like what is our choice?
It's an interesting question. I don't know. I'll try to answer it, then I'll let them pipe in if that's okay. Because the guides do say we have free will, and that's our gift, that we get to choose. And even in the work that they do, they require choice of the student. If you want this, you can have it, but you have to say yes to it, because it's kind of like, if I'm going to choose to get on the roller coaster, I may understand that I may lose my lunch, when we start going down too fast, but I'm making the choice to sit through the experience. I could have said no, perhaps. The life that I'm living now is not what I planned on at all. I wasn't I was raised sort of an atheist. I didn't really believe in this stuff. And I still, don't understand it, but I do know it's true on a very foundational level. So did I choose this? Was it chosen for me? The guides talk about this odd thing. They call it the braiding of the will. And they say, there's this paradigm in spiritual teachings, thy will, not mine, be done, which can be the refusal of the will of the personality self. Like, that must be bad because I desire, because I want. And what the guides talk about, which is a bit different, is this idea of unification. And they say, the divine will, the higher will, and the small self's will can braid. And then it becomes, thy will and mine are one. But as that happens, they say the will at the personality level is actually assumed by the higher. It merges with the higher. So you're not operating anymore at this level of polarity. So I'm sure I said that all wrong, almost right. They're saying almost right, we wish to correct. We wish to correct on 2 points. On 2 points, will is a gift of the divine. Yes, Will is a gift of the divine. Yes, your soul has purpose. Yes, your soul has purpose. Yes, but you may choose not to fulfill a soul's purpose. But you may choose not to fulfill a soul's purpose. You will do it in another lifetime. You will do it in another lifetime. That doesn't invalidate the learning that the soul would bring you, that the soul would bring you through any experience, through any experience. In other words, you may choose to end a marriage. You may choose to end a marriage, learn what it's like to live without it, learn what it is like to live without it, choose to remain and learn those lessons there, and learn those lessons there in a higher way. In a higher way, everything is imperfection. Everything is imperfection, but you don't have the ability, for this level of perception, for this level of perception, and you will not until you align beyond the idea of form, until you align beyond the idea of form, and that this experience here, in the body, in a collective room to be informed, in a collective agreement to be informed, is simply a vast school, where everybody is encouraged, to realize who they may truly be, at the cost of what once was, period. In the same period.
Yeah, I remember reading some about the braiding of the wills, and I think that's a beautiful way to articulate how this works. It's difficult we like to have definite lines, where we like carve this out. Well, this is my choice, and this is the soul's choice, but it's really so blended. It's really more of a gradient where things are influencing, and we have the ability to resist or accept or move or choose, and maybe there's certain things that are purely the small self's choice, like vanilla or chocolate. When you go to the ice cream shop, the soul probably doesn't have any vested interest in that. So maybe that is entirely our choice, but maybe it's also driven by a craving that we have for, or some kind of patterning that we have. So it gets all very difficult, but just to understand that we don't have to have these definite boundaries. And that's just, again, our desire to have an understanding of things that's binary, that's black or white, when really everything is a confluence.
When you talk about this, I think we've talked about this before, but my coming into this stuff wasn't because I thought it would be nice to get spiritual. I didn't know what a spiritual life was, or that one could have one, why one would want them. I wasn't a seeker at all. You're a seeker. You studied philosophy. This is part of how you showed up. I showed up, bottoming out in a hotel in St. Paul, Minnesota, reading the Bible that the Gideon left in the drawer, and it's sort of a crisis. And I didn't believe in anything, but I was in a crisis that night, and I knew it, and I said it. And when I look back at my life and, the trajectory that I was on, which was fairly self-destructive, but in a really kind of sexy, fashionable way, at the time I was, in Interview magazine, and I was getting produced through, New York and London, and it all looked great from the outside. But what I experienced in many ways, and it came by my request, and that's the key to this one, I said help, and something happened. I heard a voice 3 days later, and I went, whoa, it was the first voice. And I listened to it, and I had the choice to listen to it. There are other times earlier in my life when I had that same voice. When I think back about how hard it must have been to get anything through me because I was so dense and frightened energetically, what it must have taken to get a message through in those days must have been enormous. And there were other times when I didn't listen. And boy, did I pay. Hard choices. I went through a bunch of pain when I said, well, I understand what I'm hearing, but it's not what I want. And so I learned through those things as well. Those experiences were incredibly valuable for me. Could I have lived without them? Yes, I think I could have, and perhaps had a different trajectory. But I understand that free will is honored. The whole teaching of the guides, which really does seem to be about the realization, they call it the monad, sometimes they call it the Christed self, sometimes they call it the eternal self, that aspect of us that truly knows, they say, that seeks to express itself as who and what we are, does come at the cost of the old, which is what I think should be based on my, on my experience, based on the world I grew up in, what it means to be a guy, what it means to be, my age, what it means to be a success. All of these ideas get challenged in some ways. But I also suspect that will is still present. I get to show up. There are things that I do that I say, well, I'm being willful. Frankly, I'm just lazy and I have bad habits. That's my will expressing itself in ways that are not of benefit to me. If I were to take the time and listen, or act on what I truly know to be true, I'd maybe be having a different experience in some areas of my life. Here, and this is just me, we've hung out and, I'm a bit shy socially. I'm okay when I'm in a role, but, you invite me to a party, I'll lurk in the background someplace. It's just who I've been. And this funny experience that I'm having here on Maui, really funny, because I didn't choose this, or maybe I did. I bought the plane ticket. I ended up here. I just said yes to somebody who said, there's a place you can stay. But the experience I'm beginning to have through saying yes to a lot of things I normally would not have said yes to are opening me so wide that I can't even describe it. And to feel sort of so held in this right now is not my normal state of operating. I tend to operate with some caution, and I worry too much. So I'm having this other experience of simply saying yes, and saying yes without an agenda of what should be, because my agenda went out the window in March. I moved into this new apartment, and I've not spent a night in my new apartment in New York. I moved there during the shutdown. People move things with, hazmat stuff on. Here, I'm going, what the hell happened? How did this all happen? But they were lecturing, the guides lecture a lot, and they're doing this other book now, and they were starting to talk about saying yes, like the cosmic yes to God. And maybe God is all things, and what that really brings us to. And they say, and it was an interesting teaching, and I'm sure I'm not going to get it right, but they basically said, you're all so busy trying to get what you think you should have or what you want. And when you move into sort of the cosmic yes, the great yes to source, then it can all be present because you're saying yes to what's inclusive of those things. You're not saying, I need this the way I think I should have it. You're saying yes to the source of all things so that you can be provided for. It's about moving into a level of congruence, I expect, with the divine beyond the mandates of what should be, And that's where I'm at right now. I don't know if I'll hang out here much longer, but it's for the moment.
One of the ways the guides teach a lot about, how that we can affect the world and how that we can kind of look things is through frequency. I think it's why they use constantly the idea of octave. It's this idea of frequency. Even sometimes they'll sing a tone or they'll express something in tone. And it seems like part of the process that we're going through, the elevation to the upper room, could be articulated as an elevation in our own frequency, a frequency of greater adherence to love and this kind of tone that we're putting out. It's pretty clear to see how that affects from like a local cause and effect level. Like you're in this positive vibration, you around somebody else, their mood is going to increase, perhaps through mirror neurons or some materialist reductionist explanation as to why, but there also seems to be some energetic metaphysical. But what I'm curious about is how much this affects, perhaps uploads that frequency to the collective or changes the collective song. When we raise our frequency, how important is that for the whole collective?
Well, it's the essence of what they're teaching. And it's very, they say, one of you wakes up, you wake up 1,000 more by nature of your presence. And that means how you're operating in vibration. The guides talk about the upper room as a level of consciousness. You can call it Christ mind is how they describe it. And they say when you operate at this level, you become the doorway or the bridge or the portal to the higher by nature of being. They talk about the kingdom, and they say the kingdom is the presence of the divine that may be known as all things, not what I like, what I think is pretty, what I think is acceptable, but all things. The divine is all things. And they say, the one who operates at this level of perception actually calls it into being by nature of vibration. So the divine as you claims the divine in all things into the escalation of vibration that brings it to its true nature. In other words, you're not denying God, you're perceiving God, and consequently, its presence is known. Now, they say this happens because they've done a lot of work with this, and a lot of this work has been very public in front of, lots and lots of people. And they work with this thing called the echo, and they use this claim, the claims, and we've done these before. I know who I am in truth. I know what I am in truth. I know how I serve in truth, which they are saying all is about rearticulation, the re-knowing of self as the divine self, and the manifestation of that, the what. And when they begin to work with the what, it gets really interesting. I know what you are in truth. They would put people, say, 12 feet apart from each other and have one claim the inherent divine as what, as form, and the other. The person feels the energy when it comes, but the person who's sending the energy, who's making the claim, begins to feel the residual affect of it, which comes in like as a rolling wave of energy back. It's like sonar or the ring of a bell. It's fascinating. So they say when you're operating at this level, when you're claiming the inherent what, the divine what is what you see, the vibration is actually calling the energy into being back to you. It's all about co-resonance, all of it. So they often say things like, we sing your song for you so that you may learn the words. And the words, I don't think, are just the invocations or the attunements that they do through language. It's really about the tone that you hold and what your experience is. I don't know that it's about being visible. I don't think you have to be visible. I think, how, I'll say this, it's an interesting thing. I went through a period where I was reading for rockers and, big stadium players, and because I don't know who anybody is. So I read for this one guy, it was like this Metallica, I think. And I read for this guy. He was a really nice guy, and I'm reading for him, but I tuned into him, and he got so big energetically. His energy field was so big that he could fill a stadium, and he did. And I understood what that must be like, to be able to essentially, I almost want to say, make love to thousands of people at once through doing what you love. It was an amazing thing to feel by proxy. But I think at this level, we're all doing this. It isn't just bless the pretty flower. It really is walking into, a stadium and claiming the inherent divinity of everybody there, because that's the truth of who they are. You're claiming the truth. The guys say you can't make anything holy. It already is. But you can deny the divinity in anything, and mostly we do. And they say, consequently, we're operating in a world that's in shadow, when the light that's really present is so much brighter. And and that's what we're dealing with now. I think the light is here, and it's turning over some of the rocks, and the creepy crawlies are being seen. None of it's fun or pleasant, but I think it's part of this process of rearticulation. I don't think, the guides have often said, if you have a body buried in the basement, it's going to stink up the whole house, and I think we have these things personally, we have them culturally, we have them as a species.
Yeah, it's a collective weeding of the garden, which is one another metaphor they use, which is just weeding the garden. We do that individually by exposing those things that we're ashamed about, being vulnerable to people and allowing them to see into us and weed the garden of all of these hidden, dark, murky rocks that we have. And it seems like as we can individually do that, now that's happening in the collective, maybe not with the most grace in all the ways, which is normal. These things are kind of bumpy, but I think for those of us who understand that process within ourselves, it doesn't help to shame and punish and villainize any aspect or any part of our past, which we see so often with this person's canceled and this person, it's all this kind of shame and attack and punishment model, which is then just creating more shame and more protection and more keeping more things in the dark. Whereas if we can acknowledge that those choices may have ramifications and legal ramifications or physical things that need to be attended to, but nonetheless, it's love that's going to actually weed the garden.
Yeah, I think we're accountable to our acts, and what you're saying is absolutely true. Nobody gets healed by that. Nothing gets healed by that. That's not, it's reaffirming what we say we don't want. Things are brought to the light to be lifted, not to be ridiculed or shamed or condemned. I think that becomes our opportunity. I don't know that we're there yet. I'm sensitive. I was, the chubby gay kid, and who was the last one picked for, whatever, that's who I was. So I know what it's like to feel as an outsider. It's been very much a part of my experience in this life. But I have to say what it's granted me, if nothing else, is a level of empathy that I maybe needed this time around. I really know. And I'm sensitive, I suspect, to cruelty in whatever form it takes. It's the one thing that I have a very hard time with, is intentional cruelty, whether it's being, done with noble intentions. I think we always have to look back and come back to what our intentions are. Why are we saying what we're saying? Why are we doing what we're doing? It becomes too convenient at a certain point, because the guides say this, and it's very, very, very true. Who you damn and what you damn damns you back. It perpetuates the cycle. It doesn't transform it. To recognize the inherent divinity in the one that you can't stand is actually, I suspect, how one really grows spiritually. And I do believe that when one is perceived that way by another, one is also changed. I remember watching this once. It was on TV. It must have been like Oprah. I don't know what it was. But it was some clip of some guy who was standing up in court speaking to the man who had been convicted and was about to serve like a life sentence for killing his adult child, I think it was. And this man was an African-American man. He was an older man. And he stood there and he said, "I forgive you," to this man. "I forgive you." And the man who was about to serve a life sentence collapsed, sobbing. Collapsed. I mean, it was an astonishing moment of redemption, I have to say, of the power of witness and the power of forgiveness. And, the guides talk about forgiveness a lot, and they say, it's not about letting people off the hook. It's about freeing yourselves. Again, who you put in darkness puts you in that darkness with it. It becomes a tether or a tie. I think it was Book of Mastery, there's that meditation they do where they say, the one person you never want to see again is in the cave that you enter. And your job now is to walk them back out into the light. It's because you're the one that put them there. Who you put in darkness calls you there. So I'll leave it at that.
Our mutual friend and brother, Ted Decker, he wrote in his book, 49th Mystic, Rise of the Mystics, there was a quote from Jesus's teachings that says, the way you love the least of us, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, the way you love the least of us is the way that you love the divine, right? So, and I was meditating on that, and I recognize that, of course, applies to exactly, literally what you were just talking about, because those that you damn puts you in that same part, which is then damning the divine, because what you damn in another is also damning the divine, as we're all divine. But I also recognize that there's a particular insidious aspect of the aspects of ourself that we damn, the parts of us that we condemn, which then it's a double thing, because not only are we condemning a part, but we're being the condemner. So we're like suffering the double-edged aspect of this by damning ourselves.
I agree completely. The book that's coming out next, Alchemy, is about that in a lot of ways. And that was the 8th book that was created through me, and it was the hardest book I've ever had to show up for. It was actually brutal. I found out I was channeling at the Esalen Institute, and I didn't know whether they were going to start a book or not. And I got an email the third day I was there in the morning that a friend of mine from my academic life had taken his life. And I was stunned. It was the last person I thought, somebody who'd really been a rock for me in my life and my career. And I was devastated. And I sat down before this class who gathered for the channeling, and the guides began the book that day, when I was so out of sorts that I don't even know if I remember a word that they said. And the entire book was dictated when I was really being confronted with parts of myself that I did not want anything to do with at all, and they were all being moved. When that book was completed, I initially thought this book should be published with a warning because it's going to really move stuff. And when I was here on Maui, I did the audiobook here in a studio here because the studio in New York was still shut down, and I happened to be here. And I sat for the first time and read the book aloud, into the mic. And it's such a loving book. And it's not in the least bit scary, not in the least bit. But it really is about just what you're talking about, these parts of ourselves that we, the guides say this, and this is not a new teaching. This is in 12-step stuff. It's in most mysticism I expect, but they say, God is all things or God is nothing. You really don't get to have it both ways. And, if I want to put myself in darkness through my inability to accept or forgive or to release myself from some belief or trauma or memory, I can have those experiences. I don't suggest that this is easy. I don't think this is magic wand stuff. None of this work that comes through me is spiritual bypassing or what's called that, because the guides again say nothing gets transformed until it's seen or at least accepted as being. And then it can change. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been beautiful. I wonder if the guides would be willing to bring us through some kind of final message and maybe some kind of affirmation or raising of our own vibration and tone before we wrap this thing up.
Let me see. Speak. They're saying we would like to speak, we would like to have authorization, and we would like to have authorization to do as we wish with this instruction, to do as we wish with this instructor. We're asking both of this. We are asking both of you for this because this will be a brief teaching, on rearticulation, what it means to become the true self, and what it means to become the true self. If you truly wish this path, you will be taught in love. You will be taught in love. It will be taught thoroughly, and you will be taught thoroughly, but this will come at a cost. But this will come at a cost. It's simply the idea, and it is simply the idea of who you are and what is meant to be you and what it has meant to be. You're not limiting the self. You are not limiting the self through this choice. You're agreeing to a higher choice. You are agreeing to a higher choice. Now, if you wish to say these words with us, we will instruct you. We will instruct you in their meaning. I know who I am in truth. I know who I am in truth. You may say this. You may say this. I know what I am in truth. I know what I am in truth. You may say this. You may say this. I know how I serve in truth. I know how I serve in truth. You may say this. You may say this. Who you are is the divine self. Who you are is the divine self. What you are is the manifestation of this. How you serve is how you express as it. Now you may say this if you wish. Now you may say this if you wish. I am free. 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 The claim of freedom to be beyond the small self-limitations, and beyond the idea of who one should be, and be beyond the idea of who one should be, will claim you in a higher way. We call it the upper room. If you wish to vibrate at this level, at this level, you may become accustomed to it. But to introduce you to it now, for it may be welcomed again. Is to make this claim, I am in the upper room. I am in the upper room. You may say this. You may say this.
I am in the upper room.
I may say this. Now you may say this, and this is the articulation of the divine self. And this is the articulation of the divine self with monad, or the monad in expression. I have come. I have come. I have come.
I have come.
They're saying blessings to each of you. The announcement has been made. The announcement has been made. Be prepared. Be prepared to make some choices, to invigorate your potential in its unfoldment, Thank you each. Good night. So they're saying thank you each and good night. So,
Paul, thank you. Paul, I love you as a man, as just who you are. And it's been so beautiful to have this friendship, between us, and also the teachings and the guidance has been absolutely invaluable in my life and so many others that I've introduced this work to and I've talked to about. It's just, you're such a gift to my life and to the world at large. And I'm just so unbelievably grateful for you and all the teachings that come through you.
Aubrey, thank you. I love you too. Thank you.
You're the best. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for checking out this video. For more like it, please subscribe to my channel. And of course, the Aubrey Marcus Podcast with new episodes every single week. And follow me on Instagram @Aubrey Marcus. Thank you so much.